American retailers are filing for bankruptcy at an alarming rate that's quickly approaching recessionary levels. What has caused the sector's distress? Donald Trump's European tour ended on an unhappy note with a giant perception gap between him and the other state leaders. Where will his deglobalization policy lead the US economy?
Set the stage for a great revival of American manufacturing.
Alibaba's Jack Ma met with Trump earlier this year, promising to create 1 million jobs in the United States. Will e-commerce become the solution to American economic challenges and eventually the means for global development? And in Zambia, 31 Chinese nationals who had been detained for alleged illegal mining have finally been released by the police. What should be done to protect the legal rights and safety of Chinese nationals overseas?
State Councilor Wang Yong's official African tour has taken him to Lusaka, the capital city of Zambia, to coincide with the release of 31 Chinese workers who were accused of the illegal acquisition of copper ore. In the first part of our program, we'll, however, look at how the incident has been handled, as well as the Chinese business presence in Africa in general. In the second part of the program, we'll discuss the massive closures of American retail shops under the impact of e-commerce. To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by He Wenping, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Charles Liu, founder of How Capital. We shall also speak to Alvis Emmanuel, Muasawa of the African Consensus Forum via telephone, and Robert Cab, Director of the Economist Corporate Network via satellite. He is based in Hong Kong. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Instead of addressing the disastrous closures of hundreds of retail shops in the US, let's first of all look at what's happening in Zambia, one country that's supposed to enjoy a very friendly history with China, and yet 31 Chinese workers have been detained. Fortunately, they have been released. Now, let me brief you about what State Councilor Wang Yong has done and has achieved in Lusaka, capital city of Zambia. He has basically reached two agreements with the local authorities. One is, of course, the expansion of a local general hospital. We spend 200 million RMB. And the second mega project is the proposed construction of a conference center to prepare Zambia for an upcoming African Union meeting by the year 2022. Now, what do you think of the relationship, if any, between the release of 31 Chinese workers and generosity in assisting the Zambian government in their construction of two things, hospital and the conference center?
Yeah, I think these two things now happen to be show up at the same time on the same page. So, which exactly shows this very complexity of China-African relations. So, in general, we have been enjoying the very good relation. Both politically, the political ties has been strengthened year by year, and also economic, the cooperation has been also marching forward. By those number of trade volume and the investment volume and the projects that we have been undertaken. So all of that is very good, rosy picture. But beneath that very rosy picture, you will see, because those stakeholders coming from China into Africa, now it's no longer just those diplomats or politicians or like a state-owned company, those big company enjoy those big projects. Now there are also those individual, small miners and even the individual traders, they all goes to Africa. So we see achievements on the one hand and also problems coming from another hand, like a same coin, two sides.
Charles, do you think she is suggesting clearly the huge part below the tip of the iceberg when it comes to problems in Africa?
No, I wouldn't quite call it what's below the ocean surface. There was a report in the BBC 2 years ago that there are over 1 million entrepreneurs in China, from China in Africa now, setting up companies, doing manufacturing, raising chickens, raising pigs, and doing all kinds of business. They, of course, operate on a different level, completely different from the state-owned companies and the Chinese government's subsidized or supported projects for Africa. They're there to make money. And they often get as much as possible by having the highest efficiency and having the highest profitability. Sometimes, in terms of the projects that I've done in Africa, on the private side, you go with the local style. But the problem with, if locals go with local style is one thing. If you're a foreigner, you go with local style, sometimes it's not quite accepted. If you're a private company, you go with local style, you could be criticized.
Well, when you look at what you call local style of getting the things done, you have to be aware of what happened in the wake of the end of the Cold War. Now, many African countries have been democratized. They become young democracies. They respect rule of law. Now, why do you think the spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry shows apparent dissatisfaction with the way the 31 Chinese workers have been treated? And they were accused of being involved in sort of illegal ore retailing. Now, what do you think of that kind of connectivity?
Yeah, if we look about this case, this specific case, you will see the way of those police, Zambia police to treat, to arrest those Chinese people. I think it's not fair at all. Because I also check out some information saying they haven't shown any evidence. If you show evidence saying I have done something illegal, okay, that's we have to abide by the local law. So you couldn't say anything about that. But now they haven't shown any evidence, and then just the wrong, there's no differential treatment, no matter it's a pregnancy woman or you have some disease, and then they all arrested those Chinese, put them in the jail, and without any evidence. So that's illegal. I think this legal thing has been done in an illegal way. So I think this is not fair. But on the one hand, you mentioned that because lots of African countries, they got independence. Some of them, they through the guerrilla fighting, some of them through the agreement reached with the colonizer. So they have taken over. All of those laws has been made by those colonizers, either British law system or French law system. So it's a lot of very good set of those laws, labor law or environmental protection law, all over that. But they can pick up anything and now put on the table saying you are not abide by the law. But before there is a gray area. Even the law is there, but maybe you turn a blind eyes to see those implementation. So there's a gray area.
But Charles, given your experience in Africa, doing business there, do you think many of the Chinese stakeholders are well prepared for the legal system, for the legal environment?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's not a question. I think what you said is absolutely true. One is gray area, two is interpretation, three is who is the subject who is being subjected to the legal interpretation. If it is a local group, or, for example, local trading in terms of iron ore, in this particular case, is not a managed market. People do it on the streets. People do it loosely, and it's not monitored. And I don't see Zambians being arrested for doing what the Chinese are supposed to do. So sometimes it could be competition. And this is what happens when the private business people go to Africa. They're not prepared for dealing with the local authority. They're not prepared to deal with the local cultural and social setups. It's very difficult, very, very difficult.
I wonder if we can talk to a local guy who works for the African Consensus Forum, but we need to have a local feedback about why, for example, before this incident, local Zambians had protested against some European and Indian mining companies and to death. And more demonstrations have also occurred. So the thing, as I said earlier, is after democratization, it's an impressive political process in the wake of the Cold War. legal framework has been established. The thing is whether we would fall victim to their democracy, quote unquote. Why? Because when the ruling party is in power, they would do whatever to attract Chinese investment under the severe scrutiny of the opposition forces. Now, when the opposition forces take office, they would say, hey, let's reconsider the Chinese project, citing environmental concerns, national security reasons. Do you think this
Not only in
will be
Africa.
part of the vicious cycle? Do you think we are prepared for this kind of democracy? I mean, this is a lot of theater, politics internally.
That's true. As you rightly put forward, after the end of the Cold War, now Africa, all the African countries now has been embracing this multi-party election and democracy. So ruling party and the opposition party, that's the way. Yeah, or several years this one, several years that one. But we have been engaged with this kind of change also for a long, long time. So now we have been dealing with both. Not only just dealing with the ruling party, we're also dealing with the opposition party. So we also in China, and then we have a talk, had a discussion. So it's not just that case, because this is the case is not only towards China.
Excuse me, if we invite the opposition party to come over and have a private talk, does that amount to internal, I mean, interference with the internal affairs?
No, I think it has nothing to do with this internal affairs. You are not inviting those rebel forces like to China. Opposition
Why
party,
not? Moderates of the Taliban have also been invited to come, and the rebel forces from Syria have also been invited. Now, don't you think we are quietly changing our traditional diplomacy, which means we would have no interference with the internal
No,
affairs?
actually, if you look at the opposition party, they're also members of parliament. You are
they
inviting
join,
members,
some
they're
are
also
joining,
part of
yes,
the
joining
government.
Hopefully. Now, the next question, Charles. What kind of homework do you think the non-public business from China should do before they go to Africa? I mean, it seems these guys would always damage our reputation, and our credibility has seriously been compromised due to their alarming, poor behavior there.
Well, I'm not sure
They do laundry. They do, I mean, trafficking. I mean, sometimes local media say they are also involved in prostitution. So these kind of illegal things happen. Allegedly, some of the Chinese were involved in the scandals. Now, do you think we should have done a lot more to educate those self-employed people? Now, you guys got to respect the local customs and rule of law.
Yes, you have to. I mean,
Their religion, for example.
This is something that the Chinese government has to do something with. It's very, very difficult. I've spent many times, I've been to Africa and looking at businesses and so on. And it's very, very difficult, and it's very, very complicated. Most of the Chinese businessmen who go there are not the really sophisticated businessmen of Beijing or Shanghai. They're from small towns in Zhejiang, Wenzhou, and other places in the south. And they are not very sophisticated to start with. I think it may be best for the Chinese embassies in these countries to actually roll out some programs for them before they set up businesses. It's not, we're not talking a big state who are really disciplined and know what they're doing. But you also cannot tell them not to go. You have to allow them to go and make a living. If you look at, for example, in many African countries, you had Indians there for generations, and they conducted business, and in most cases they've been quite successful.
Thank you so much. Let me go to our African commentator for his comments on what's happened in Zambia. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. We were talking about the behavior and image of the Chinese business communities in Africa. Now, in the wake of the Cold War, more and more Chinese investment and labor force are going to Africa. A lot of things impressive, very impressive, to help industrialize the local economy. On the other hand, legal disputes occurred. So what do you think of the homework that the Chinese business should have done before they can be accepted totally by the host country?
I couldn't couldn't hear the question clearly. Sorry, can you repeat it again?
My question is, the image and the behavior of Chinese businessmen in Africa, do you think they should have done more homework so that they can abide by the local laws and they can be accepted by the host country?
Yes, I think there's few problems to that. The first one is the cultural difference. I think Chinese people should there must be more integration between Chinese and Africans. I've been working with few Chinese companies here in Tanzania, and I've faced some of the problems, which most of them are raised through cultural differences. And if you look at the wages, starting from the cultural differences, most of the time Chinese people don't understand African culture, and Africans don't understand Chinese culture. For instance, maybe working out and what Africans like and what they don't. So this creates some kind of hostility between employees and employers.
How do you evaluate the Sino-Zambian ties in the post-Cold War era? For example, during the Cold War, the older generation of both Chinese and Zambians were clearly aware of the Zambian-Tanzania railway, a hallmark of the friendship that characterizes our relationship with Africa. Now, it seems the younger generation don't know what has happened, but therefore, many Chinese here start to ask questions, look, we have done so much for Africa, and yet we've been treated not very nicely. What do you think of this kind of relevance?
I think we still have strong relation with the Chinese. Most of Africans are so welcoming. They like China. They like Chinese people. They like the culture, and they really appreciate the help Chinese government is trying to do to African countries. But the thing is, in the ground, there are some few problems when it comes to Chinese investors in Africa. This is it's more of a people-to-people problem, not as a raw picture. Because you might find some of the investors, let's say Chinese investors or European investors, the way they treat the locals is different. So their perspective now to Chinese government or Chinese culture is changing. But that's only for few people. But in general, the relationship is still good, and Africans still appreciate the help Chinese government is doing to Africa.
Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your insightful comments on the general picture, the relationship between Africa and China. When we come back, we'll look at why so many retail shops are being closed due to the enormous impact of e-commerce in the United States. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Charles. Well, it's an entirely different topic. It's about the U.S. economy, and I'm afraid President Donald Trump will be facing an uphill battle in terms of why up to 10,000 retail shops are likely to be closed in this year, 2017. I mean, this will make headlines. I mean, this will cause heavy unemployment.
It certainly would, but business is business. Business means you seek higher efficiency, higher productivity. E-commerce is much more effective, much more efficient than brick-and-mortar shops. There's no question about that. Look at it not only for the United States, but for China, how it's really exploded. And businesses will be seeking higher efficiency, which means e-commerce will continue to boom, and brick-and-mortar will continue to fall. And he will face unemployment. And this is the same thing with every other sector I think every other major industrial sector in the US, where higher efficiency, seeking higher efficiency has led to automation, industrializations, robotics, and so on. It's unfortunate, but that's where it's headed.
Thank you so much. Let me go to Robert Kapp for his comments on why we're going to see such a big impact upon the retail industry in the United States. Hello, Robert. President Trump won his presidency on the platform of job creation, and those who work for the retail industry account for 10% of the working population in the United States. Do you think this tidal wave of unemployment would further erode the presidency and the credibility of Donald Trump's presidency?
Well, there's certainly disruption occurring, and there has been a retrenchment of consumer spending, it seems, in the wake of the presidential election. However, actually, according to the statistics we use at the Economist Intelligence Unit, the retail sector added 50,000 jobs in April of this year. So it is in fact growing. It's that it's not growing in certain bricks and mortars retailers, but it is growing in online and higher end sectors. I mean, Uniqlo, Saks, H&M, these retailers are doing well. It's the lower end retailers that are suffering.
Charles, what do you think of the impact of automation? By mentioning automation, we are actually referring to the advent of artificial intelligence, which threatens, or in other words, promises to overhaul our industrial in the coming years.
I think Robert is absolutely right in this. It's the creation of different jobs. Automation requires people who know how
in other words, we're going to be made redundant.
No, there will be people who are good at what automation and artificial intelligence and big data and logistics and robotics. Those who are good at that, who are trained to do that, will find very easy to get new jobs. But those who are in the traditional brick and mortar side, the cashiers and the shelf stackers, are not going to have a great time.
So, Robert, what's going to happen to the manufacturing industry in the United States, where President Trump vows to reindustrialize your economy?
Well, I certainly hope, as Charles was just mentioning, that we aren't made redundant. That all of us and those watching, it really is a matter of moving up to value add. So the key, actually, for the Trump administration, as it was for the Obama administration, but they didn't do as good a job at it as they probably should have, and that is retraining workers and getting people geared up for higher skill demand.
Are you hopeful, Robert, that Jack Ma will be very helpful in creating 1 million jobs? Because he visited President Trump, the president-elect, and promised generously that the e-commerce of Alibaba will definitely do a lot to assist the president.
Well, I think where it could render assistance, I don't know if the million jobs is going to actually happen, but where it could lend assistance is to small and medium-sized enterprises. So the really good news is if you're a small manufacturer or you have a small, say, boutique offering, indeed, whether it's Alibaba or it's on Amazon or somewhere else, an e-commerce platform could help you.
Charles, do you think the decline of the retail industry is a global trend?
I wouldn't call it a retail industry because it's not declining. It's
restructuring.
Right. It is really e-commerce is booming as it is in China. In fact, it's going cross-border because much imports are now going into e-commerce in China from other countries. And this is maybe what Jack Ma is talking about too, is American products from the boutiques, from the small and medium-sized enterprises can be sold directly to Chinese consumers. So I don't think it will decline, especially given the increases in the wages and possibly the GDP and the income of Africans and South Americans and other Asians. Potentially the retail industry through e-commerce will boom even further.
Robert, I don't know if you have any idea about what's going to happen to Walmart, the retail giant, and also Sears and Kmart. Now these giants are likely to further reduce their labor force. Will they do this to live up to the standards of e-commerce?
Well, I have to say, although I'm not an expert on this specifically, what I've read and comprehended through EIU reports is that indeed Sears is on tough times. Walmart is doing better. It had made an acquisition in e-commerce, Jet.com, for over $3 billion. There's also a way they're trying to compete with Amazon in terms of the Internet of Things, ordering through Wi-Fi devices. So that's the way to go. Walmart seems better positioned, but not the older retailers like Sears and Kmart.
There is a kind of modest success about the Abenomics, Robert. in terms of promoting efficiency of Japanese enterprises, particularly those overseas multinationals.
Yeah.
However, Japan constantly faces the dilemma of demographic changes, an aging society, and therefore Prime Minister Shinzo Abe proposes to use more of the automation robots to promote efficiency and perhaps the use of zones for logistics. Do you think this kind of a Hollywood picture will unfold in the Japanese market?
Well, you know, Yang Rui, in fact, Japan has always been at the forefront of doing things in automation, industrial automation back in the 80s and 90s. Responded normally very well to this. They've had this demographic shift that you mentioned, which forces this drive towards automation even further. And if they continue now, like they used to do, and were well known for in the 80s and the early part of the 90s, yeah, I think they could do very well. But they really have to drive more with automation and efficiency.
Well, the use of robots and the drones will definitely, help save Japanese women, housewives. They can concentrate on their household chores. But the labor shortage is a chronic problem for the Japanese government. So, in general, Charles, what are the benefits and challenges, or possibly even disadvantages of artificial intelligence development, which is set to replace the internet somehow?
That's new to me. Artificial intelligence replacing the internet. Internet is just a platform. Artificial intelligence, especially machine learning, coupled with IoT, as Robert has said, the Internet of Things, machine-to-machine communications, is certainly going to enhance efficiency in manufacturing, production, logistics, and delivery of services. And that's going to reduce jobs, no question, except create jobs for those who are trained and educated in these sectors.
China assumes the leadership in e-commerce, and do you think with the new normal of the Chinese economy, Jack Ma, Liu Qiangdong, Baidu, these guys will work together to upgrade the Chinese commerce, and we're going to set a good example for the rest of the world?
There's no question, but whether or not it could be a good example for the rest of the world is still debatable, because China is a massive market by itself. With that market, you can have the economies of scale, you can have the logistics, you can have the efficient production of goods.
After all, we only have about 60% of the service industry, even put to shame by India. And domestic consumption will definitely help revitalize Chinese economy. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. Thank you, Charles, for being with us. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.